everyone, welcome back to the channel. So this video is going to basically be a follow-up to the previous video I did. I read an article about the history and current state of Cartoon Network, and I didn't read the whole article, but one of the parts I skipped over involved cartoons and merchandising, and it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, so I wanted to address it here, because I didn't feel like it fit in with the main point of that other video, so I just want to talk about it now. But it says, for years, American cartoons had been mired in mediocrity. For much of the 1980s, shows based on toy lines from Transformers to G.I. Joe crowded the airwaves. The Cartoon Network team thought the merchandise-driven shows lacked the feral ingenuity of animation's early years, when imaginative, wigged-out directors like Tex Avery and Chuck Jones ruled the rambunctious medium. It was time they agreed to re-embrace the creator-driven approach. So I take issue with this statement for multiple reasons. Like, while it is true that those shows did have toy lines associated with them and incorporated into their storylines, I think it's unfair to totally dismiss them as basically not having any merit or artistic integrity just because they were profit-driven. Because the truth is, animation in general, and to be fair, media in general, is largely profit-driven, and that includes Cartoon Network. Like, obviously, they had a lot of passion and creative people working on them, but Cartoon Network has been known to cancel shows because they weren't able to get merchandising or they had low toy sales, like Symbiotic Titan or Young Justice. And to elaborate on that, here's an article from Screen Rant from 2011 talking about Symbiotic Titan and why it was canceled, which they cite as due to lack of merchandise. Symbiotic Titan was an action mech show from Genndy Tartakovsky, who's a very prominent animator to come out of Cartoon Network. As it says here, Genndy Tartakovsky has been responsible for some of the best, most creative, and most iconic animated series of the past 2 decades, including Dexter's Laboratory, Samurai Jack, and Star Wars: The Clone Wars. So Tartakovsky definitely fits into the kind of animation director they were talking about. I mean, obviously he has a very different style from those classic and legendary animators like Tex Avery, but he still falls into that same visionary director of producing really impactful and really creative projects. But he still had his show canceled because they couldn't get merchandising, which they explain down here. According to a Cartoon Networker who spoke to the Tag blog, Genndy's moved on to Sony Pictures Animation. Titan got competitive ratings with other action shows, but what shut it down was it didn't have enough toys connected to it. If you don't have the toy sales, the studios don't want to renew for another season. So we have this creative visionary in Tartakovsky, just like Cartoon Network was talking about, but his stuff was still canned because it didn't have toy sales associated with it. And that was Cartoon Network's decision. And other Cartoon Network shows have been known for being very merchandise heavy, like Ben 10 or Powerpuff Girls, and Powerpuff Girls even had an episode parodying the consumeristic nature of merchandise. But that doesn't mean that Powerpuff Girls or Ben 10 or these other shows didn't have any merit of their own, even though they were successful in toy sales. And it is true that shows in the 80s like Transformers or My Little Pony or Masters of the Universe did have toys and merchandising along with it, but that doesn't mean it's fair to write them off as not being artistically driven or lacking in merit and just being mediocre toy commercials that last for 30 minutes. Like, for example, here's an article talking about Filmation, who made the He-Man cartoon, and they were constantly being accused of just being a 30-minute toy commercial, and they commented on that. But they also took into consideration an educational element to the show, so they hired a child psychologist. So it says, to satisfy the broadcast standards of the time and respond to growing criticism of the show, episodes concluded with brief segments that recapped the events and drove home a moral to the story. And Halperin and Schreimer are some of the people who worked on the show. So Halperin states, we hired a child psychologist to write those endings. This was in response to major outcry by parents groups that complained the show was nothing but a half-hour commercial for He-Man toys and was very violent. We needed to do something to ameliorate that. Each episode had to have its own message, so the endings were written based on the script of that episode. Later on, I started writing them myself. I'd rather have them integrated than tacked on. So I did want to prove that this was a real show that they put a lot of effort into, and they were artistic in what they were doing. And they were clearly very frustrated with constantly being labeled and written off as just a toy commercial, which which they talk about here later in the article. Right or wrong, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe has become the poster child for 80s animation that began as an elaborate toy commercial. Internally at the time, though, nothing could be further from the truth. I saw it as something different, however. I was specifically aware, because I was working for Mattel, that there were times when they'd say, and so I had to say okay because they were paying the bills. But whether the show was an elaborate toy commercial, it wasn't. When the show was syndicated, the FCC had a rule that said we could not have a Mattel commercial showing during the show itself. Mattel was not allowed to advertise any of its He-Man toys in the show. And then the other executives go on to say the toys were not part of the show when we were recording. They had absolutely no influence on what we did or even thought about. I can say none of us thought the show was just a toy commercial, but I can definitely say that most of us thought there was value in what we were doing. I think you have to believe that or make yourself believe it in order to produce anything of substance. I think one of the main reasons the show succeeded then and has endured now is that there was a lot of heart to the storytelling. There was some dopiness and silly stuff, sure, and there were some writers whose interest didn't go much beyond cashing a paycheck, but at its core the show was about people who cared for and about each other, and I think that resonated. The show was fundamentally about relationships and people, and that's what we focused on at Filmation. I know everything thought that whatever new toy Mattel came out with, we had to use. No, we didn't. We only used those toys that worked for us. We were not forced to use any toy that we couldn't really justify. And then Melindy Britt, who was the voice of She-Ra, also went on to say, we just went in and really didn't think about anything else but our performances. We knew nothing about that side of the business. So people from the writers to the producers to the voice actors were more concerned with doing their job and filling those roles of making a show and having it all come together. And even though there were people who were profit driven, that doesn't mean that everybody was, or that it's really fair to just write them off as mediocre cash grabs. And the same goes for other cartoons at the time. But also, I don't think it's fair to totally write off people who make toys as just mediocre, profit-driven slop, because they are also artists themselves. Like, for example, there's a documentary called The Toys That Made Us, and they made an episode on He-Man, and they went over the artists at Mattel who made the original toy line, and listening to them talk, it is pretty clear that they had a lot of passion and resourcefulness and creativity that they aren't really given any credit for. But I think the way these critics talk about toys is kind of the way critics of animation talk about animation. Like, it's just dumb kid stuff. It shouldn't really be taken seriously. It has no merit or artistic integrity because it's just dumb kid stuff. And just because something's for kids doesn't mean it has no value or merit or artistic integrity. That's just extremely dismissive. Toys encourage imagination and creativity. So I just think that the statement left a lot to be desired and not really fair to the animation or toy aspect of these shows. Especially coming from Cartoon Network, that's pretty ironic. Like, tell that to Gendy Tartakovsky, you know? But also, I'll probably make another follow-up video just talking about toys and the artistry that goes into them and how they're actually pretty cool and fun, and it's not fair that people are so dismissive of them. So that's probably it for me right now. Let me know what your thoughts were. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to our members: Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Equestron, Norman Sweet Cream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Bam, Lucas Geist, J Draws, Meowsers, Sky, Philip, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Mac B909, Dakari the Professor, Todd McCaffrey, Omni Fair, Cavalcoj, Strider Exile, Phil C, Killer Bomb, Slawa Saporiguez, Entwined Boot 301, Griffin of Might, Frankie Camarillo, Datadyne Executive, Crimson Phantom, Jin the Goblin, Papa Hud 69, The Gengar King, and Daunter. Thank you for the support, and if you want to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and that part's free. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.